right. So thanks everybody for joining. This is our first edition of the 1% Better Production series. And what we're doing here is we're talking with experts in the business about making processes better. I've been lucky enough in my 30 plus years in this business of supporting manufacturing companies to meet a lot of really smart people. Today, we have one of those people with us. It's Chad Quick. So, Chad has generously agreed to join us and talk about, I believe, Paint Center operational excellence is the topic that
Yeah,
Chad.
well, anything to do with really paint or paint production or even, processes or raw materials, whatever. So, and it's right up your alley, right? So you've got a certain aspect of that with the products that you provide. And by the nature of what you provide, you constantly leaned on for expertise on how to apply it and to get better.
Yeah. So today we're just going to be talking through some of that experience, some of your insights, and share it with everybody. So today's series or today's conversation is sponsored by FTQ app. FTQ app helps your teams gain insight into quality while saving time. So Chad, if it's okay, I'm going to start out. I printed your bio from
Okay.
LinkedIn, and actually there was so much on there I couldn't even print it all out.
Well, I truncated it, but I can just give you the
Yeah.
highlights. So I grew up in a military family. My dad was a three-war veteran. And the reason I bring that up is, and I was an Army veteran. So he was a Marine in World War II and then went to the Air Force and retired after 30 years. And then I was in the Army, much to his consternation. But the reason I bring that up is that I got discipline from there. So anything that you're going to tackle from a process standpoint or a problem solving standpoint really needs to talk about discipline, right? Because problem solving is very hard by the nature of what we just said. Symptom solving or firefighting, is less hard. The reward can be, much quicker, if you will, right? You figured out you did something, but if it comes back the next day, then you really haven't solved the problem. So it's
Yep.
to segue into a good distinction of you've got to understand the difference between symptom solving and problem solving. And lots of customers, and managers within the customers, they want to they want you to solve symptoms because they want to go to their boss and say, hey, I had this FTC or FTQ, problem, and here's what we did to stop it, and life was good, and then you survived to fight another day. So back to my background. So I was in the Army, then I went to school. I actually went to school for aviation at Southern Illinois University, which was one of the top 5 aviation schools in the nation at that time, and worked in aviation. I've got an airframe and power plant mechanics license. Also got a private pilot's license with an instrument rating. Used to own my own plane when it was, when I had a really good deal when I lived in Illinois. So it was, very cost effective. And then after a few years in aviation, I actually met an old high school buddy who was an engineer at Graco, and he needed an application engineer over in the Detroit area. And so I started with Graco Robotics there as an application engineer. So I'm not an engineer. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Aviation Management and Associates in Aviation Technology, and a little bit of a master's, but due to my nature of my work at Chrysler, FCA, Daimler Chrysler, or whatever iteration it was, Stellantis now, I wasn't able to finish it. So, but anyway, so then I jumped ship to, actually we were building a new paint shop out in Newark, Delaware. ABB had bought Graco by that time, Graco Robotics, and TKS took the job to build that paint shop and then gave it back to Chrysler. So if you can imagine this, you got a major model launch. They were building the LH. They're kind of a overflow plant, and then they had the new Durango started there. So extremely important at that time. TKS gave the project back. So Chuck Padden, was a plant manager at Toledo and elsewhere, actually came back and hired. He was an ex-Graco guy, hired ABB to contract manage that plant. So And then towards the end of the building that plant as contract manager, I actually was hired in by Chrysler at that time as a senior specialist. So I worked in as senior specialist, responsible for application and process. And then I was a senior manager, promoted in a few years to that. And then I was a senior manager in various responsibilities for 15 years. So most of the time was spent in paint. So at corporate, we obviously launched and built paint shops, and I was responsible for warranty and audit for 4 years for the corporation from a paint perspective. And then I did so good at corporate, which was a nice cushy life. They said I better go to the plant. So I ended up going to Windsor Assembly for actually I had an interim responsibility up at Brampton and then Windsor for 3.5 years. Made the commute on expat status. Then I was at Jefferson for 2 years. Then I went back to paint operations. My wife had some health problems at that point in time, and then I was a BLM, so I was responsible for the whole program for manufacturing. So you have kind of a chief engineer in engineering and a VLM, or actually in Chrysler speak, it was called a platform exec when we were broken in. So I was a platform exec responsible for the program. So I had D segment. I was the head of D segment, which was the 200 series car at that point in time. And then also the C SUV, so which was the smaller SUVs we had at that time. So, and then from there, I was took a couple different jobs in there. I was head of maintenance for the company for a while, from an ME, manufacturing engineering standpoint. Worst job I ever had, even though my background was in maintenance. It just they weren't real serious about it, and we never really invested. So that was only about a year, and then I was promoted to be the plant manager at the Viper plant. So I was responsible for a Connor Avenue assembly plant, and then also the pilot plant at CTC. So, and then after that, I retired because Viper was coming to an end, and I was a vice president of manufacturing at SF Motors, an EV startup that ended up not panning out. So, and then Chrysler actually, their head of manufacturing and quality, Scott Garberding, called me back. I came back and worked for FCA for a year on contract supplier quality. So with that, I was in, I think, 9 different manufacturers and like 13 different plants. So, and that's one of those plants was CSP, where I met Peter. So that's, I'll kind of stop there, right? So the point of going through all that is not to, everybody's going to have a nice resume when you get as old as I am, but it's a diverse resume. And at 9 o'clock, when we briefly talked about, the key is you have to keep challenging yourself. So if you're ever comfortable in your job, yeah, it's okay for a little bit, but you've got to keep learning, keep challenging yourself, even though it's more difficult. But if you're not learning and growing, then you're going to get stagnant and you're going to become, say, less relevant, both for yourself and for your customers. So,
and that's a perfect fit with the title of this series, 1% better. That's our approach is, don't expect to change the world in the day, but every day make it 1% better. Make your production 1% better and keep doing that. You're going to move that needle, and there's always going to be a new constraint. There's going to be a new challenge, but the better you get at that process of making it better, it creates a momentum and the flywheel effect. That's what
yeah,
we've experienced.
A couple things I'll share for the, some of your younger folks. Back when I was growing up, Stephen Covey, I don't know if you're familiar with him. I'm sure Peter is, but he had the 7 habits of highly successful leadership. I would recommend just buying that cassette or DVD without going through all the books. You can buy them on eBay, even cheap. The cassette kind of ages myself, so it's by CD. But in any case, one of those things is you kind of put in 4 quadrants. There's things that are urgent and important, and urgent, not important, etc. But you've got to focus on, there is a time for firefighting, and if things are urgent and important, you may not have a choice. But most things you want to keep out of that quadrant prioritization. So you said something there, Peter, and this was kind of right out of, I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but right out of the kind of Toyota production system, TPS. So playbook. So everything you do, you have to treat people with respect and dignity. So that's, I'm paraphrasing again, but the other thing, you have to drive and foster a culture of continuous improvement. So there's your 1%. So
Yep.
no matter how good you think you are, nobody else is standing by patting you on the back. You can take a little breather. Even Stephen Covey back in the day said it's part of sharpening your saw.
Yep.
You've got to smell the roses, but every day you have to get a little bit better. And you have to, as a leader, and leaders are at all level. You don't have to have some fancy title to be a leader. Each one of you are running your own business in your family, in your, whether you're a signal or you've got kids or parents that you take care of, right? You're managing a checkbook, you're managing a business, if you will. So, you're a leader at all kinds of different levels. And the last thing then, you have to eliminate waste. So I got that pretty much from Sergio Marchioni when he took over, us when we merged with Fiat. But you have to understand the difference between loss and waste. So waste is just that. So an easy way to define it is waste is, achieving a desired result with utilizing more than the allocated or assigned resources. So that's waste. You're using more resources to
Yep.
achieve the desired output. Loss is, ideally, you would not be using, if you have waste and loss. So if you're using more resources and not achieving the desired result, that's really bad, right? But loss in itself is using the assigned or allocated resources and not achieving your output. So a pure loss would be if you're, say, in a production environment, you're at your current manpower and current resources, and you didn't make the build for the day, or you had a quality spill. So waste is using more than your assigned resources or allocated resources and still not achieving it. So you have to, there's a important distinction there between loss and waste, because if you're wasteful, then you're going to attack it with a different problem solving methodology. If you're a loss, right, everybody can pretty much understand first time quality or first time capability, right? FTC, FTQ. So
Yep.
and then,
Yeah, that
go ahead.
that idea of waste is, for us, in our traditional business, that's one of our things that we think of as the low hanging fruit. So let's go look at the process. Let's go benchmark it. Let's go find the waste, because we can get rid of waste without actually changing the process.
Correct.
It just makes everything better.
So, I mean, even sandpaper. So if you're still using 3M Trizac, right? I used to sketch this out by hand. So if you ever look at Trizac under a microscope, it looks like a bunch of little sharp mountains. So they're all little, you'll see the top of a pyramid. And when you use that sandpaper, the operator go, well, this stuff isn't working. I'm going to throw it away and get a new one. And really, it's the swarf or whatever you call it. It's the sanding dust that fills in the valleys of that Trizac sandpaper. And that's why you spray it off with water or you use a brush alon, because actually, as those peaks of those little mountains flatten off, your sandpaper gets more effective until it becomes translucent. So, but most people don't understand that in the paint shop. They want to use more pressure, wear out your arms and your sander or your polisher or whatever, and not let the tool do the job.
And I noticed on your resume that you have your green belt, so you understand that as well.
I do. Yeah, I went through. I went through University of Michigan. I actually think it was that time it was Chrysler Group LLC. So I was volunteered at Windsor. My boss was actually supposed to go, the plant manager. He's an old buddy of mine, but he wasn't much for school. He says, Chad, you're going like an hour before. And then for me, it was, I'd easier go to Ann Arbor even than from my house than it is to go to Windsor. So I want to get to a point where I don't have a hard stop at 12:30. I don't know, maybe if your team does, but I would like to talk about a couple of things and if you took some notes, take some notes. So to get to 1% better or whatever, to get better, you have to identify a problem And it's really key that you actually you take the time to write down a problem statement. Because you can get a bunch of people in a room and talk about the problem, but you may be talking about it in too much of a generality. So you absolutely have to, get everybody focused on a real problem solving. And it's worth taking 5 minutes to talk about that, because, if you don't, everybody's seen, the old, or heard the old saying, right? You can't eat the elephant in one bite. But I always used to say, I'm going to eat the elephant, though. The elephant's going to get eaten, but I've got to understand the problems. And if that's 1% at a time or whatever, then you have to go do that. But get a problem solving. The other thing,
Yeah, Ted,
yeah.
do you have a preferred tool or technique that you like to use for that?
Well, there is. I mean, there's a tool in world-class manufacturing that came about with Fiat, and they're not the only ones that use world-class manufacturing. Whirlpool's adopting it now. Royal Mail, one of the best mail functions in the world. There's many different industries that use WCM, but so you can Google. It's called a 5W1H. 5W1H. You can Google that. I'm not gonna, I have the WCM books, and I was indoctrinated in WCM. I was a people development pillar lead, as we call it, and also what the heck was it? It was autonomous maintenance pillar lead.
Yep.
But there's a certain toolbox within WCM or the Toyota Production Society, system, or BMW system, or Dana's. They all have that. But a 5W1H will focus on a problem. Once you have a problem statement, then you can use a 4M analysis. There's like a 5-step methodology. I'm just going to go over them in a highlight. So a 4M is a fishbone diagram. Some people will use a 4M1D. Some people will use a 4M1D1S, meaning you've got design built into there, and you've got safety built into there. So
the 4M is man, machine,
yeah,
method,
yeah,
and material.
you got it. So if you have to break the problem statement down into that, because it may have various, maybe tentacles or whatever, right? So you can't just treat them. So, I'm not going to solve a man issue with, let's say, going for a material standard, right? So we talk about the toolbox to solve it, right? So, again, I'm not going to attack man. I'm not going to attack a machine issue, and with a human resource, which was one of the things, or the way to teach people that you would attack for man. I'm not going to treat that machine that way, right? It's just not logical. So once you do a fishbone, right, and the fishbone you can equate to, those are potential root causes, not probable, but potential. So those are the thing. And then you got to apply a 5Y. So once you break it down into a fishbone, then you can do your 5Y. And again, these things are all available online. Nowadays, you don't need a textbook or anything, right? You type in 5Y, you'll get 5,000 examples. So
for those who've not heard of the 5 Whys before, Chad, how would you give a high level description of that?
It's just a way to get right. So you keep asking yourself why until you come to a root cause.
2, 3, 4. Yeah. By the
5,
typically.
Whatever. So,
yep.
And then to attack. So once you have a 5Y and you've understood root cause, so 5Y you can equate to root cause analysis. Then you can attack it with a Kaizen, right? Which is just the Japanese word for continuous improvement, or PDCA. PDCA, plan, do, check, act.
Mm-hmm.
So the plan is actually basically relisting your problem statement. A lot of PDCAs have a 4M or fishbone or Ishikawa diagram built right into it. And then the most important pieces of a Kaizen, a continuous improvement, is the check and the act, right? Because if you're just spinning your wheels, you're doing something, and we fall into that trap, right? People, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Show me that you're busy.
Show me that, what have you done? Let's go. I got a problem. The place is on fire, and can't get the build. What are you doing now, right? And it takes some discipline, back to discipline, to get out of that. but without the check and the act to make sure that your actions, because resources are finite, you don't have infinite resources. So if you're applying resources, right, let's make sure that they're applied, in a very efficient manner, and you're getting some return on your investment. So
Yeah, that's a great explanation of how to go through that
yeah.
process.
I got a bunch of things.
Starts all over.
Yeah, the last thing I would like to share is it sounds very simple, but it actually took me a few years to really understand it. So there's no basis for continuous improvement. So no basis for continuous improvement without standardization. So
Yep.
so if you're just chasing your tail, and it could be something very simple, but so let's say you've got someone, you guys supply polishers and polish and sandpaper, right? If that person is not doing it in a standard way, right? If the substrate's not where it needs to be, if the orbiter hasn't been, lubricated and torque tested and the right air pressure and all that, you're just chasing your tail if you're going after a defect. So you have to get to the standard, and it's very boring. It's not very glorifying when you're asking these mundane questions, but you have to have a standard, whether it be a material standard or method, right? If the operator is supposed to do something, and Peter knows this, so we did it at CSP. I'm not sure if one of these fine fellows was there or not, but people they were tacking off the car. Well, they had no clue how to tack off a car. But yeah, we tack off every little piece of a fascia or top or whatever, right? But they didn't know how to do it. They didn't even know how to fold the cloth appropriately. So very, very rich for Peter, because he was making a lot of money throwing away a lot of stuff, but that's not a long-term solution either, because then
not sustainable.
then you're going to be caught competing on price with someone that comes in and the next year when they go out for bid, if you haven't done your value added. So you can make money in the short term, but long term, it's not what the customer's after. So that's I got a bunch of things written down, but I think those are the, we didn't talk about safety. So back in, people might have heard SQDCM, and then maybe E or M. So it's safety, quality, delivery, cost, and morale was the original. And a lot of people then combined environmental with morale, but you have to provide a safe work environment. So that's key. So everything that I've said, the first premise is that you've got to have your safety covered, whether that be the appropriate PPE for somebody, or proper guarding on a tool, or the proper regulator on air pressure, or whatever it may be. You've got to have safety. If you have quality, you get delivery for free. So lots of people will focus on delivery, but they're missing the quality. And not to
I
pick
never
on
thought about it that way.
So
Yeah.
to pick on not to pick on CSP, but how many did you build today? Well, they didn't talk about what the yield was, or the FTC or FTQ, right? And how many of them were second time runs? Well, that's just waste, right? Every time you have to repaint something or redo something due to errors, then you're just spending, the worst waste is typically, most people will talk about 7 kinds of waste, 7 types of waste, very common. But the worst waste is overproduction, because it encompasses all the other kinds of waste. So, and just to do things over and over again, just, it's like beating your head against the wall. So you younger guys probably don't remember the Coyote and the Sheepdog cartoon, but, the sheepdog was sitting on top of the hill underneath the big tree, and the coyote would be chasing the sheep. And after the cartoon was done, it took a half hour, then the coyote, they'd go back up, and there's a time clock nearer the tree, and I'm paraphrasing, and the coyote would say, see you tomorrow, Ralph. Yeah, see you. I forget the coyote's name, but it was a classic cartoon. They would just run around all day and be tired as hell, and come back the next day and do the same thing over and over again. So that is not a 1% improvement. So I'd like to, if you're okay, Peter, and again, thanks for having, I'd like to open it up for questions, because I'm sure some of your folks may have questions on what we talked about, or just a specific problem that they're having a tough time to attack right now.
Yeah, there you go. I think Michael is very appropriate that he's on. His
Uh,
company is actually one of our good partners.
uh,
So, Michael,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Chad, thanks for your time. Peter, thanks for putting this together. I'm actually in Canada right now at Brampton Assembly Plant.
Okay.
We are implementing a new tack cloth there, and love your point about standardization. You know, right now labor is such an issue that these standardized processes that you preach aren't being followed because the turnover is so fast. So it's a lot of things I'm doing right now is trying to just get buy-in to follow the process, and it will make your life easier, because if you're doing it the right way, your supervisor's not going to be crawling up your back. You
Yeah.
know,
And at Brampton, I ran that paint shop on an
oh, did you?
Yeah, Bill Craig was the
I'm with Contact, by the way. So I handle all of the Stellantis accounts
Okay,
for North
good.
America.
So yeah, that's and that shop, they prioritize the manpower to assembly. Not all plants are that disciplined, if you will, for that, but so they'll take paint or body shop and yank the manpower there to make sure they've got assembly fully manned.
Okay.
So it's just, it was the only plant that really kind of struck me that way. I think most, but they didn't, they would do it at paint's detriment, if you will. So
Yeah.
maybe I was just sensitive to it at that time. So who's the paint center manager up there now?
His name's Jason Efrades. I don't know how to spell the last name.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not familiar with them. So
there's been a lot of shifting and things since the acquisition. Right now, everything's about cost, no matter what it is.
yeah, it's typical. So actually, it worked out good to me when Daimler bought Chrysler. They laid off two of my bosses, and then I got the combination of their job and got promoted. So it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
Accelerated my paycheck there. So what problem? What you got going up there then?
Not really a problem. We're coming in as the cost savings.
Okay.
The tack cloth does a much superior job to the Adele knits. It's just training the operators how to use a tackier tack cloth so they're not leaving transfer on the vehicle and marring it. That's
Right.
the biggest hill to overcome.
Yeah, let the cloth do the job. So
Yeah, you'll be familiar. The yellower tack cloth, the bond tack cloth, that's us.
okay. Yeah, I used to know who was Contact guys pretty well. I can't.
Tom Roble, by any chance? He was always the Chrysler guy.
Yeah, and then I used to know the owner.
Erwin Effler.
Yeah, and then some of them came from BASF way back in the day. So
Yep, Bob Ketter.
Yeah, I know Ketter really well. So
yeah, I just golfed with him. Met him for the first time.
Yeah, if you talk to him again, tell him Chad Quick said hello.
Yeah, we'll do. Small world once you're in it.
Oh yeah, it's a small world, which is one thing I should mention too. Never burn your bridges. So I've had some really bastards I had to work with, and when I was a supplier at ABB and Graco, so I've been on both sides of the fence, right? So
yeah,
and but even some of my bosses were, I won't even mention their names, but I learned from them, and after they weren't my boss anymore, we still treated each other amicably. So
Yeah. So, Chad, I have a question for you.
okay.
So if you think back to when you first started in the business, what would be one core concept that you wish you knew at that time? If you could just teleport one idea back to yourself when you
I kind of had that symptom solving versus problem solving. So I don't think I understood that. So, and I'll take a minute if I got it. So when we were building the Newark paint shop, I was, Chrysler had hired ABB. I was a contract manager on that team, and I was responsible as a contract manager for the complete powder booth system. So everything, air houses and everything. Then I was responsible for all the robots in the plant. And then also they tacked on the paint. So I'll get to this. So we had a supplier back then. And actually they're a great bunch of guys, but they were falling behind. Part of my job was to write a punch list, right? Or discrepancy list, right? So I had this, and it was becoming very painful for both them and the plant. They couldn't run because supplier hadn't delivered, with some of their deliverables. So I had this whole list made up. I think it was 50 or 60 punch list type items. They had a big soiree. The plant manager was there. 2 VPs came in from Detroit to Delaware, and this was a big Saturday thing. And so I'm sitting up there, and we actually had overhead projectors back in the day, believe it or not. Some of you may not even know what those are, but so I had the slides, overhead projectors, made them all out, right? We spent a couple of days getting, and I had these people right by the short hairs. I mean, I knew everything that was effed up with them. So we got through about, and there's VPs there, right? So I'm, it's a pretty impressive group of people, and I'm just a lowly contract manager. So I get through about a third of this presentation, and it dawned on me. I think one of the VPs did something and I had kind of like a little epiphany, and I told myself in the middle of it, you're the dumbest person in this room because you have focused all your time and energy on writing these lists and telling people how effed up they are, and you haven't solved one problem. So that's what I would leave everyone with, to answer your question, focus on problem solving, right? If I had put those days of effort and walking around the plant and writing down discrepancies and having meetings, going over them, and the problem solving, the first, if you take a stratification and, you take your biggest problem first, right? If I would have just solved the first 4 or 5 of those things, we probably would have been in a lot better shape as a team. So I would focus on the problem solving, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And no matter if people drag you to be part of the problem,
Yeah. So I may not be attributing this properly, so forgive me if I don't, but at some point somebody shared with me this concept of blameless problem solving.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to figure out what exactly that means, but when you can figure out how to do that, it makes the team so much more effective. So blameless problem solving, and it's related to what you're talking about, Chad.
Yep,
If
exactly.
you can, yep, and I believe that comes from leadership.
Yeah, and focusing on the data, right? Not on the. Very rarely is it a people problem anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk about that. How important is data in problem solving?
You have to understand what it is. So, and you've got to stratify the data. So otherwise, it's just too big to understand. Stratification means you've got to Pareto it, right? Pareto was an Italian philosopher from the 1400s. But you've got to do your bar chart, right? So you go after, you focus what's on urgent and important. So don't focus on this the minutia over here. Although there's a whole concept to, if this were a graph, I think I'm doing it backwards where you guys can see, right? So if you had a slope there, right? So you've got a bunch of stuff over here that is called tail of the dragon or tail of the
long
tail of the scorpion. And that's important too. But you got to focus on these big bars. So focus on what's urgent and important, and what will give you the biggest reward.
My favorite saying is, if you don't have data, you're just another guy with an opinion.
Yeah, exactly. But and some people with opinions, you gotta, satisfy them to fight another day.
Yeah. Chad, what do you think is one of the most common reasons where a team would fail in that problem solving and continuous improvement?
Well, a lot of us, and myself, and probably people on this call, right, have been rewarded for firefighting. So problem solving is much tougher. It's much more boring. You don't get to stand up in your wrap-up meeting at the end of the day, or in the staff meeting in the morning, or whenever, right, or your quality meeting, and talk about something that you did that was successful, right? It's kind of boring. So, and problem solving though can be just as challenging as firefighting, right? It's got to have logic. It's got to be, you got to have rigor, meaning that you got to attack it, right? It's just not something that you do when you're bored. It's got to have pace, and you got to look at the results. So it's got to It's got to have logic, rigor, pace, and results. So if you apply those types of things to problem solving, they actually can be pretty fun. And not all problem solvings take, a half year to solve. So, it's just like if, with the TAC rag example here from Michael, right? So, do they have an SWI, right? Do they have a standard work instruction, that clearly delineates, what is the proper way to fold and hold that tack rag, and how many wipes do you get? Are there boundary layer samples, to tell you that tells you picture wise, the wrong way to do it, right? How does someone pick up that they're leaving the, tack residue, on the substrate or whatever like that. So those are all key, but it's got to have rigor and pace.
Yeah, I like that. You said logic, rigor, pace, and results.
Well, yeah.
Got it.
And if it's logical, right, other than the 1% of people that I don't spend much time with, right, because they're just not worth it, or 0.5%, whatever it is. Very few of those actually at the end of the day. But if it's logical, right, then most people can relate to it, and they will help you along your journey. So.
Yep. All right, Chad, I have another question I'd like to ask. So if you were teaching a class and you had a room full of eager students, what would be one or two important ideas that you would want to take them from day one through that class? If you can think of, if you're a teacher, what is it that you want to teach?
So I was at one point in time a certified level 5 2-day Kaizen class teacher. So again, we're talking problem solving here, right? Which is the basis for this discussion anyway. So back to, you got to understand the problem. Everybody's got to agree on it, and you need to be singularly focused. And then there's different methodologies, right? But Kaizen is it, continuous improvement. So I'll answer the question that way. And the PDCA, right? So you need to establish, lots of people are very good at writing down. So you've got problem number 1, you might have a description, right? You might have, a proposed due date, and then, maybe, what's your notes there, right? What the current status is, but that's not a PDCA. So you need a PDCA in actual form that you can get off the internet all day long now to maintain that discipline, right? So I can remember this. I was going to St. Louis, and I had just come out of, I was a brand new Chrysler senior specialist, and they threw me down to St. Louis after Delaware. And St. Louis was hell on wheels back then. This was a truck plant, not the minivan plant when St. Louis even existed. It doesn't exist anymore. So, and they had long lists, and we'd have meetings at 5:15 in the morning to go over the open issues list, or whatever they called it back then. I don't think it was called a PDCA. And so I'm sitting there as a new mouse in the corner, and they go, "Who's this guy?" Well, he's a new PIM engineer, because it was called Paint and Energy Management back then, not paint operations. He's another corporate, asshole, so, and, but after about 4 or 5 things, they just swapped spit in the room. They didn't solve a problem. And I'm going, "Oh, time out." and I go, "You haven't done anything. I said, these things aren't hard problems, and they've been on this list for like, I think it was weeks, I said, whatever the date was on there, date open, right, date closed, typical stuff. So let's solve one problem today and then go have our coffee." Well, the next day, the word got out. Plant manager came to the conference room in the paint shop. He says, and then kind of, it was not the right answer I was at. He says, "You guys do whatever Chad Quick says to do," and blah, blah, blah. So it's one way to get things done, but you've got to focus on the problem. If the problem is there and it's written down, then solve it. So.
Yeah, that accountability to those actions
Yeah.
is where we see a lot of challenges.
And it's tough. I tell you, I've been in, right? So I was in corporate. I was responsible at one point in time for 4 years, all so we had 12 plants back then, and I was responsible for paint process and launch. My team was, but I was the senior manager with that team, right? So we had application, we had a quality warranty, we were responsible for the paint standard operating procedures. We had a whole process verification team, so I think I had 40 or 50 people at that point in time. And, it was just, so you're responsible for all that, but you've got to I lost my thought process here, but you've got to parse out the minutia and focus on the problem. So,
Yep.
and you
Yeah.
got to lean on your people. So,
Guys, I have to run, but thank you for your time.
yeah, no,
Thanks for
thank
joining,
you.
Michael.
Have a good week.
Yeah, good luck with
Yep.
Brampton. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good day. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. Okay.
All right, Chad, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time.
Well, I
It's,
hope
I've,
it's worthwhile.
it's fascinating to me. I picked up a few things, so thank you. And a lot of the things you said are just those fundamental techniques and ideas that it doesn't matter if it's 10 years ago or 10 years from now. Those fundamentals don't change.
No, they don't. So,
Yeah, but thank you for sharing I am not familiar with the 5W1H, so I'm going to go read up on that.
yeah, it's just so the reason it's 5, and there's one of the W's is not why. So you do not ask the question or the 5 why. You do not ask that until after you have a problem statement, and then you do a 4M analysis. Then you can attack that potential root cause with a 5 why. So
Yep.
one of the W's, I'll be a spoiler, is not why. So people may think that it is, but it's not. So it gets in. Then you'll just say it. But yeah, you can Google 5W1H all day long. So
Yep, I will look that up. All right. So Chad, thank you.
yeah, no problem.
Let me just close it out for everybody. Thank you for watching and listening. This is the 1% Better Production Series. And Chad, we appreciate you being our first guest and sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure.
All
Have
right.
a great day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.